The world is reacting to a second potential terror attack in 4 days. 3 people now dead and 5 injured after a gunman opened fire on a tram car in a heavily Muslim neighborhood in the Netherlands yesterday. The victims include 2 men, ages 28 and 49, and a 19-year-old woman. An investigation is now in full swing as authorities are treating the attack as a possible terrorist incident. This attack, of course, comes as the community in Christchurch, New Zealand is still reeling from Friday's massacre that killed 50 worshippers at 2 local mosques. Remember, schools and houses of worship, that's where people seek refuge. In an impassioned speech in front of the parliament this morning, Prime Minister refused to say the shooter's name, saying she would instead, quote, speak the names of those who lost their lives rather than the name of the man who took them. But she also asked Parliament to look into the role social media played in the attack.
There is no question that ideas and language of division and hate have existed for decades, but their form of distribution, the tools of organisation, they are new. We cannot simply sit back and accept that these platforms just exist.
This is a really important conversation. Joining me now, former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security under President Obama, Jeh Johnson. Mr. Secretary, you have been speaking recently on this need to return to decency and civility, not pointing the finger at one specific group or another. How did we get here and why?
Well, Stephanie, thanks for having me on this important topic. There is, without a doubt, a rising tide of hate and violence based upon racism, bigotry, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism in this country and now across the planet. Most recently, the Dutch attack and then New Zealand. When I read, for example, the manifesto left by the Coast Guard officer who was arrested
in Maryland
last month in Maryland, I could not help but think that he and others who've turned to violence felt as though in their own deranged mind they were emboldened and encouraged to do so by some very large voices that perhaps would even condone what they're doing in their deranged minds. And so, without a doubt, there's a correlation between what these people who turn to violence feel they should do and the rhetoric that we actually see online. And so, what I've been advocating is that our leaders, those who command a microphone, have to raise the level of civility and accept responsibility for their words, which lead to certain actions. In the minds of certain deranged people, it makes violence inevitable. And so our leaders have to accept responsibility for this. People do listen to their leaders.
Is it born out of hate? Or is it born out of hopelessness? Because when you hear from many of these people, when you hear from these shooters, it almost seems as though their life wasn't working, they felt forgotten, and then somehow ended up on a path that took them to this terrible place. But if it's starting truly from a place of isolationism, isn't there a way to get to them and fix this before we get to this place? Because of social media and these groups who can find one another, it just gets worse and worse quickly.
Yes, all of the above, feeling of isolation, hatred, racism, and you are correct, which is why when I was secretary, we spent a lot of time supporting efforts at the community level to identify someone who's heading in the wrong direction, who may be headed toward a violent path, and prevent and interdict that person even before law enforcement might get involved. That became, when I was secretary, the cornerstone really of our Homeland Security counterterrorism mission here in the United States, which includes not only foreign-inspired terrorist-type attacks, but also violence of a domestic-based extremist nature. I think we've got to go after one as much as the other. We're seeing that now reflected in the tragic violence in this country and abroad.
So when you think about the southern border and all the people across the country who are not at the southern border, but they're watching the news and they're being told there's an invasion happening, what do you say to those people? You have that audience to help them feel better or more constructive in their community.
Stephanie, the overwhelming majority of people crossing our southern border today, and they're crossing today at numbers we haven't seen in 12 years, are women, children, families leaving Central America because they are desperate to get out of Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador because of the poverty and violence in those countries. They are victims of violence and have no choice but to flee a burning building. We have extremist elements in this country. We have far too many who turn to violence, but simply focusing on the southern border is not the answer to our homeland security problems. You're correct to identify that we need to do more at a local level to interdict, to prevent turning people away from violence who may feel a sense of isolation, hatred, and bitterness. And that's a domestic-based mission.
Yesterday, Kirstjen Nielsen spoke, and it was a surprise because the president certainly doesn't say it, but she listed the threat of a cyber attack at the top of her list of concerns. That's not something we hear from the president. What do you think is the biggest threat?
When I came to the job of Secretary of Homeland Security, I had very much a counterterrorism focus from my days at the Department of Defense. I used to say that counterterrorism needs to be the cornerstone of our mission. I quickly concluded that cybersecurity needed to be the other cornerstone. Cyberspace.
It's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse, and it will get worse. In my judgment, it will get worse before it gets better. Cyberspace is the new battle space. There are attacks occurring daily, hourly since I entered this building. And so DHS is in a position to be the government's prime spokesperson, mover and shaker on this issue in partnership with the private sector. In my judgment, we haven't done enough yet to build those public-private partnerships. And it's always easier to be on offense than it is on defense, without a doubt. And we've yet to turn the corner. Those of us on defense still struggle to keep up. Those on offense are getting more ingenious, more tenacious, more aggressive all the time.
And quickly before we go, if our leaders aren't sending a message to return us to civility, what can individuals do every day?
As we enter the election season, I think it's incumbent upon voters as a prerequisite for the job of elected office to demand that those who command a microphone accept the responsibility and the consequences for their words. Words do matter. People do listen. And so when our leaders lower the standards for civility and behavior, all the rest of us feel like we're entitled to do the same thing. And unfortunately, for those who are dangerously deranged, it makes violence inevitable.
Well, then we have to demand better.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.